Good morning, everyone. My name is Anthony Tibbs, and I'm going to talk a little bit about alternative format access to print material and how the need to shift some of the focus on producing this alternate format back to the people who are publishing the material in the first place. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about who I am. I wear a number of different hats, and I need different kinds of materials for each of those roles. I am first and foremost a student. I'm currently in my third year of the law program at McGill University, and I did my undergraduate degree in business at the University of Ottawa, graduated in 2006. So seven and a half years down the post-secondary role, I've experienced the good, the bad, and the ugly as far as alternative formats go and getting textbooks and materials. I am an advocate. I'm currently the National Treasurer with the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians, and we did have a consultation with the IELA project back in the spring. We look forward to seeing the results from all of that. I'm Vice President of Guide Dog Users of Canada, and while I was at the University of Ottawa, I was also one of the founding members of a student-run organization for students with disabilities there that was created to fill some of the gaps left by the administration in terms of access to extracurricular activities, things that the university doesn't necessarily provide accommodations for, but to engage students in the community life there. Frustrated with the job prospects, especially in terms of part-time work for somebody who is visually impaired. I've tried to make most of my own work over the last year or so, and it's one way of getting experience, and it seems to be working all right. But the information I need for that's very different from the information that I necessarily need at school. And I am a user of multiple formats. For some things, Braille is most useful in terms of for mathematics or something like that. Other things, large print, e-text, and audio formats, especially for leisure reading or literary things. So I use all these formats, and getting material in the format that is most applicable for that particular task can be a challenge. In the workshop description, it said that access to information is a fundamental right of Canadians. And I have to ask if that's really true. It should be true, and we would like it to be true, but there is nowhere in a legal sense that says that it is true. And this is a bit of a problem in that the Copyright Act specifically provides an exemption for reproducing material for people with a print disability, but it doesn't require that this be done, and there's nowhere that really does. So in that sense, it would be great if it was a fundamental right of Canadians, but at the moment, it isn't, unfortunately. And it really limits what ends up being available. And even with this exemption, it's not limitless. In particular, it doesn't allow a third-party producer to make a large print copy of a work. Only the original publisher has that right, as a starting point. And for a lot of people who have low vision, that might be the most reasonable accommodation that they need, and that can be limiting. It doesn't allow this work to be contracted out to private companies. The exemption only applies to individuals that are doing this work and to nonprofit or charitable organizations that are doing this work. There's no room for the private sector to get in here to compete. And you sometimes then, if they were able to do that, number one, there would probably be a lot more available, and number two, the quality would probably be better than what we necessarily get now because there would be competition. But at the moment, the private sector can't really get into this in any large, to any large extent without permission from the original publisher. Even when publishers do give their permission and perhaps even send an electronic file to a producer, whether that be CNIB or a university, they sometimes send it with all sorts of restrictions. I know of one case where they sent the file and they said that they could make an electronic version of the book, but they weren't allowed to produce a Braille copy. And depending on what you're dealing with and the student that you're talking about, that may or may not be of any use. There are some students who perhaps have large closets, but actually do all their reading out, from Braille textbooks, and it doesn't help if a publisher says, yes, we'll give you the book, but you're not allowed to make it in that particular format. And this isn't something that is really allowed for, per se, as a copyright law. It's just something that they tack on, and at the end of the day, I suspect you could probably do it and nobody could really stop you, but the producers don't want to take that risk when the publisher specifically said, don't do it. And I had a case of a book that I got in an electronic format. It was actually accessible. That was very good. But there were so many restrictions on it that basically they wanted us to come back to them every 4 months at the beginning of every semester and get permission again to continue using it. And this, number one, my vision isn't going to change. It's not going to get better overnight and I'm suddenly not going to be entitled to it. And number two, this becomes very time consuming. If you had to do this for every book, it's just not very realistic. And this is a reference book that, we need throughout the program that everybody uses. So sometimes even if you get a copy, the publishers try to put all these restrictions on it that are very limiting. For those who may not be fully aware of how this works, to get material into alternate formats, there's a number of different ways to do it. And in recent years, the advancement of scanners and optical character recognition programs to convert printed text into, say, a Microsoft Word document have made this a whole lot easier. It's really opened a huge number of doors, particularly for people who are blind or low vision or who have other print disabilities, to access material that otherwise wasn't available before. And this is great, but it's not a perfect system. The recognition isn't perfect. There are errors introduced. If you're dealing with complicated layouts, like in a textbook, where you might have boxes along one side of the page or pictures in between or multiple colors, it's not perfect. It may not get everything, and it may not get it in the order that you're supposed to read it in. And in that sense, these systems have opened up a lot of doors, but it's not sufficient by itself. And from a student's point of view, it can be very time consuming. If you have 5 or 6 books that you have to scan as you're trying to read them and learn from them, there just aren't enough hours in the day. And a lot of people end up taking reduced course loads just because there's no way to do all that on top of the academic studies themselves. It's already been mentioned that very little of this print material is actually available. Less than 5% of Canadian material, never mind anything published elsewhere, of Canadian material is available in alternate format. Part of that has to do with the producers, in that the nonprofits only have so many resources to go around, and they have to make decisions when they're deciding what to produce as to what will be most beneficial. The masses are going to want a certain type of book, a certain selection of books, and those are the ones that they tend to produce. This doesn't tend to do students a whole lot of good, and it doesn't do much good in the professional world, because the books that we need as students, as employees, as professionals, aren't the same ones that people need for literary reading. And it's just a fact that of that 5% that's available, very little of it is necessarily going to be useful from a technical academic standpoint. The other thing is that these special formats that are used, this came up a lot in the ILA consultation as well, in that a library might have material in a specialized transferred format, but it requires a particular device to play it or use it. And if people don't have access to those devices on top of it, it's just as bad as having the original print version. So some of the solutions that people propose as far as being able to duplicate it while still protecting it for the publisher that's worried about mass duplication and distribution, those solutions sometimes propose their own limits. This brings us to what are the role of publishers in all of this, the people who are making the book initially. Ideally, the alternative format production process should be part of their main production mechanism, ideally. So when they are making the original book, at that stage, when they have the original files and they have the original content, at that stage is where it should be set aside and sent off to wherever it needs to be sent to be either transcribed for Braille or put into an e-text format. And that should be incorporated as part of the publishing process in the first place. Because if they do it as part of the publishing process, it's not going to add much in the way of cost on a per unit basis for the 100,000 books that they're selling. And you can spread it out then. Then you don't have a charity that has to come up with $20,000 to transcribe one book after the fact for the 100, 200 people who may need it. And this isn't, we already see this in other contexts. With cable television, there are levies that are on everybody's bill for certain things that only some people are going to use, but everybody pays for just because it is a public it's seen as a public service. And a similar thing really can apply here. If publishers make it part of their process in the first place, we don't have to reinvent the wheel afterwards. Less ideally, and what I'm seeing more of, certainly in the last couple of years being in university, is that publishers are a little more willing to provide format producers, disability offices, with an electronic file of the book. It may not be perfect, but it at least saves the manual labor of rescanning the entire book. And this is at least a start. It's a start in the right direction. If they can have that available as a matter of course for all their books, great. And the thing publishers seem to miss out on in this case, especially for students, is that at the end of the day, we need the book. They can either give it to us and save us the trouble of scanning it and reproducing it, or we're going to have to do it anyway. They're usually all concerned about, well, if we give you a PDF file of the book, you can give it to all your friends. Well, once we've scanned it in and we've got the PDF file, if we want to give it to our friends, we're going to give it to our friends anyway. And I don't know what about this argument doesn't fly with them, but at the end of the day, we need it one way or the other, and we're going to get it one way or the other, so it would really be much easier for everyone if they would just provide us with it in the first place. The obvious question is, do they really care? I mean, the target book or the target audience for a particular book is only so big. When you divide that down to, an academic context where it's a textbook, it's even smaller. And when you're looking at only those with print disabilities, there really isn't a huge target audience there. So in one sense, they don't really have a whole lot of incentive to care. And I think my proposal or strategy is that we need to approach this in a way that will make them care. And that means targeting large purchasers. That might be libraries. In an academic context, I'm thinking primarily of educational institutions and specifically professors and faculty. We need to target them to have them make their decisions about which book to use based on whether or not a publisher will make available alternative formats for those who need them. And I've seen this happen a few times in the last year especially. Two of my professors for next semester were trying to decide between different books, and when I contacted them to find out what they would be using, ultimately they went to the publisher and asked, whether they would be able to provide an electronic copy in the first place. One of them said yes, one of them said no, we don't want anything to do with it. So they went with the one who said yes. And if more professors are doing this, as a matter of course, when the sales reps show up to their office to try to get them to buy a book, if they make this part of the criterion, publishers will start to care because it will make a difference. And, that's what we have to advocate for going across the board. It's obvious that the copyright exemption as it is, and having nonprofit producers do this and, disability offices do it on a case-by-case basis hasn't worked. This may not force publishers to incorporate that production as part of their publishing process, but it'll at least encourage them to provide files to the disability offices and other producers to facilitate that production. And the same thing can go for public libraries in the sense that if they're going to be buying books, especially if they deal with one publisher a lot, incorporating this as a requirement in future contracts and whatnot, it gives them an incentive to care. The last thing is that a lot of the funding that goes into nonprofit organizations and charities to produce these books, it can be rechanneled into incentives for publishers to incorporate alternative format production into their process. Tie government funding that is going to authors and publishers to accessibility requirements. If an author is going to get $25,000 to, as a grant while they're writing a book, tie that to a requirement that they ensure that that book be available to alternate format producers once it is published. There are existing funding initiatives like the Book Industry Development Program through Heritage Canada. This already provides funding to publishers for things like technical training of staff in new technologies, things like this. There's no reason that they can't also create funding initiatives through that to encourage alternate format production and in multiple format production. I don't even know if this program is aware of this issue. It's something that I want to follow up with and send them a letter and see if they know. But it's something that we need to look at because it's a new avenue that I don't think has really been pursued very much, and it's something that maybe there could be some progress there. So all in all, the current strategies that have been in place in terms of copyright exemptions, and nonprofit producers, and student disability offices haven't worked. We have a very little amount of material available, and in the academic, professional, technical context, there really aren't many success stories. Technological improvements have improved the access to information with scanners and OCR, but we really need to strategize and find a new way to put pressure on publishers to make this a priority from the get-go. That means getting faculty and professors on board and potentially new funding initiatives through government programs that already exist. So in short, it comes down to universal design. If you build this book as an accessible book from the beginning, then we don't need to reinvent the wheel later. And obviously, if you're talking about technical chemistry textbooks, it's a different strategy is going to be needed than just a plain novel. But at the end of the day, the key is to get it done at the publishing level where it should be done in the first place. Thank you.